around us, whether it's at work or at home or whatever. So hopefully what I say is relevant from that perspective. And I don't pretend to have the answer because I don't believe the answer exists. So my only working assumption is that somebody in here is probably going to disagree with something that I say. That's great. I think that is part of the way forward, being able to work around, negotiate, resolve some of the differences, which doesn't necessarily mean getting to agreement. It does mean maybe understanding where different people are coming from. So that's how I'm going to preface what I'm going to say. And what I will do now is share my screen. I will just check for some confirmation that you are seeing a screen which has after hashtag Black Lives Matter, making a difference in work and life. Can you just confirm that's what you're seeing? Excellent. I've got a thumbs up from Camille. That is good enough for me. So it's about making a difference in work and life. And I think what I'm going to do is just get into it. I've got a lot of slides, but some of the slides won't stay on screen very long. So if it feels like it's moving quickly, that's good. And some of the slides I won't need to say a great deal to necessarily. They're really just there to help illustrate a point that I want to make. So let's get into it. I'm going to start where I'm going to finish. So I'm going to put something up. And when you see this again, what you'll know is that I've reached the end of my presentation. But I wanted to start with it because I think what this does is to frame everything that I'm going to say. And if you follow me on social media, and you may want to choose to do that after today, you will have seen me post this a little earlier this month. And it's an extract from an article that's written by Gary Young, who for me is one of the best journalists in the country, or he used to be, because he's now a professor of sociology at the University of Manchester. But this was from the last piece that he wrote from The Guardian. He's been writing for The Guardian for 20, 25 years. And I think this was the way that he actually finished the article. And what it says, I'll read it out just in case somebody doesn't have a visual. It says, things look bleak. The propensity to despair is strong, but should not be indulged. Sing yourself up. Imagine a world in which you might thrive, for which there is no evidence, and then fight for it. For me, that really captured, I think, where we go next with this thing called Black Lives Matter, because at one level, it's not after Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives always matter. I suppose that's why I use the hashtag, because it's really about the summer of protest and articulation that we had. But once we've done with that, and I think we have done with that up to a certain extent, what does come next? So that's really where I want to come to. And that for me sums up what does come next. Why I think that is what I'm going to be saying for the next, hopefully, 20, 25 minutes or so. I'll do it justice, but I also am as keen to get into conversation with people rather than just talk at you all evening. So, very obvious place that we're going to start. Doesn't need any explanation, doesn't need any more saying. Everybody will have their views, their feelings about George Floyd. From what I gather, I know there was a ceremony in Brixton last Wednesday, which was commemorating his birthday. And I didn't actually connect with that time because last Wednesday was also my birthday. So that was a kind of a spooky thing. It happened to be my 60th birthday as it happened. I know I don't look old enough, but take it from me, that is how old I am. So no more to be said about that. And what we saw was the protest, and we saw people coming together all over the world from every single background. Again, no more need be said. You maybe took part in it in your own way. We know all of this. At the same time, we had this thing called COVID-19 going on. And there was an active conversation about the merits or otherwise of actively protesting at a time when we were still at what some would regard as the height of the virus as well. We also know that the virus had a disproportionate impact on, I'll call them black and brown people. And that was particularly evident over here, but it's been evident around the world in many places as well. So you had a combination, a combination of events coming together at one time. Again, we all know this, not going to dwell on it particularly. There was one other thing that happened at around about that time, literally within a day or two of George Floyd, which really caught my attention, and I think has as much to say about the long term. And some of you maybe remember the Central Park incident involving two people called Cooper. And we had the woman who called the police on the black man because she thought that he was going to attack her, even though what he was saying was that she shouldn't have her dog off a leash in a certain area of Central Park. Now, that for me was really striking, because essentially what this woman acted out was, I can get you killed just by making a phone call and weaponizing my whiteness in order to create some threat for you. And as many people would have connected with that as would have connected with George Floyd, albeit for very different reasons. So that for me is something that I don't think we should forget, because that will have maybe as much, if not more, bearing on how we negotiate the way forwards between ourselves as anything that comes out of the specifics of the George Floyd affair. So right that we focus on George Floyd, horrific incident, but a very powerful reaction. And it's just interesting to explore what's maybe come out of that reaction. So what has happened since? Lots of stuff. Our lives has continued. We've remembered. People have talked about it. But I just want to pinpoint 2 or 3 things that I particularly found interesting that happened specifically in the UK, which say something about what the road ahead looks like and what there may be to contend with, to negotiate with in that road ahead. So this phrase of culture, what really brought that to prominence was all of the fuss about the BBC proms and whether or not, firstly, whether or not it's going to go ahead, and whether or not songs like Rule Britannia and Land of Hope and Glory were going to be sung at the end of proms, as there's been a tendency to do over the years. And there was a lot of fuss, for me, unnecessary fuss. And I found it striking the way in which people wanted to connect that conversation to Black Lives Matter and so on. And as far as I was aware, nobody who really speaks for Black Lives Matter was really making up an issue. There is a conversation there to have, but in the scheme of things, is it really that important? Not really. Particularly when you bear in mind something like this. Now, this is a BBC News piece from October 2001, and it's about the same thing, Land of Hope and Glory, too jingoistic. And there's a conversation about whether or not, well, it's actually about altering the words of the song because they're not appropriate for the times. The thing that really struck me about this was the bit that I've highlighted right at the end. The Conservative Party also decided not to use it at their conference. And, the Conservative Party were pretty visible in stoking up the so-called controversy. And yet, wind back 20 years, and even they themselves were deciding that this was not an appropriate song to be sung at the end of their conference. So how do you figure that out? So a cultural war, maybe a bit of a false flag in its own way, but it was just interesting to see the sort of noise that was made about that. More interesting, and I guess you can see the words I've got on the screen, so you kind of know what's coming, was the controversy around the Diversity dance troupe and their performance on Britain's Got Talent. Now, this is not a program that I watch. Now, I've seen bits of the actual routine, but again, you may or may not have watched it, and there's no judgment either way whether or not you watched it. But again, was very striking, because what we had were 24,000 complaints. And essentially it was that shut up and dance message. We watch Britain's Got Talent to be entertained. We don't want politics brought into it or whatever, even though it was clearly a form of artistic expression. And my own take is that what there was some orchestration of that number of complaints. I find it hard to believe that people really cared about it that much, that they just complained spontaneously like that. I think there was a lot of networking going on to get the numbers of the complaints up at that time. Again, for me, more striking than the number of complaints was the way that the broadcaster, ITV, chose to respond to it. And you may have seen this because they took out full-page adverts in national newspapers and everywhere. And that phrase, "We are changed by what we see, just as we are changed when we are seen." So for me, that was a demonstration that maybe corporate Britain, and they've been pretty quick to do a lot of the what you might call virtue signaling during the summer with the hashtags and the Instagram posts and whatever. This felt like small but meaningful action. No, we are not going to give in to that, which is essentially about saying, shut up and dance. We are going to back. We know what it is that happened, and we know what it says about our society, and we are going to stand behind that. For me, that was an important moment just to see them do that. It's not maybe the first time they've done it, but to be as visible as they were in doing that, for me, that was a powerful moment as well. And then much more recently, coming back to this month, and you may or may not be aware of this, we're in Black History Month, and Sainsbury's, as they've done for the last few years, were visibly signaling their support for Black History Month. And this was one of the graphics that they used. Then who we had come along was this guy, Lawrence Fox, who, having announced his intention to form a political party, seemed to me wanted to capitalize on the moment. The tweet there you can't really read because it's not very clear, but what he's essentially saying is, I won't be shopping in your supermarket ever again, whilst you promote racial segregation and discrimination. Well, okay. I think Lawrence Fox needs an appointment with Dale Carnegie. For those who don't know, he wrote a very famous self-help book in the 30s called How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think he's in need of some of that guidance right now. But again, what was striking for me was the reaction of Sainsbury's, because this was a statement that they then put out. We are proud to celebrate Black History Month together with our Black colleagues, customers and communities, and we will not tolerate racism. We proudly represent and serve our diverse society, and anyone who does not want to shop with an inclusive retailer is welcome to shop elsewhere. Now, Sainsbury's is what, maybe number 2 or number 3 supermarket in the world, in the country by sales and so on. And they are effectively saying, if you want to shop elsewhere, be our guest. I'm not sure I've seen quite as direct a statement like that from a retailer, and retailers, trust me, are about getting people in through the door. They are saying to people, if you don't support our values, don't shop with us. Again, I'm not sure I've seen too many statements like that from as visible and prominent a brand as Sainsbury's. So again, for me, that was significant. Maybe there is a shift going on here. 2 or 3 things that have happened in the months since we had the height of the protest during the summer. So what does that all mean? Number one, what it says is that the backlash is real. You know, we know this, but there is a constituency, certainly in the UK, and you can see echoes of it in the States and elsewhere, that has frankly had enough of the Black Lives Matter message. And they will find all manner of ways of making their voices heard and their presences felt. So those of us that are interested in Black lives and seeing them prosper and thrive need to be aware of that backlash. At one level, nothing new. But what it has done is stepped out into the open in a way that I don't think I've seen for quite some time. And so that is something that is important for us to bear in mind. At the same time, there is an appetite for change, not just from folks like us, people that look like me. You would expect that. I think what we've seen over the last few months is an expression of that appetite for change in a much wider cross-section of society in the UK and elsewhere in the world. I think the Sainsbury's statement is evidence of that. I know from people that I know that are doing work in the corporate world, they are getting calls from chief execs of major companies, FTSE 250s companies, who have heard what was being said during the summer and want to know what they can do in their company, which is great to see. What they're discovering is that it's easier said than done. It's one thing to say, we want to tackle this. Tackling it is another ballgame altogether. So there's an appetite for change, which sits alongside, maybe counteracts that backlash that is also visible as well. And there's no magic bullet beyond what I call push and pull. So I think it's for those of us that are keen to see progress to continue to push for progress. And as we push for progress, companies as others are pulled along by that drive for progress. That is effectively how social change works. Sometimes the change happens in the community and then institutions have to follow that, are pulled along by it as well. So that push and pull dynamic is the thing that we really need to keep going. Beyond that, there are no instant solutions. There's no way of flicking a switch and everything is going to change. So those are just some reflections on what has happened since we had the protests and so on in the summer. And it'd be great to get some comment and feedback from you on those. You may well have your own moments that you would want to throw into the conversation as well. I guess the thing for me, because if we're talking about Black Lives Matter, then there is something about, well, what do we mean by Black lives? And the word for me that really captures Black lives is plurality. So we talk about Black lives plural, but that's not one life multiplied by however many people. There are different ways of living, different ways of being, different ways of expressing Black lives that are real and present and active. And I think that's one of the things that the culture as a whole is struggling to come to terms with. So it seems to me to make sense to spend a little bit of time just talking about some of the differences that I'm seeing, because those differences are quite distinct in their own way. It's not a question of right or wrong, they're just different. So let me start with, and this is very much a personal reflection, but again, maybe it will make sense. You'll maybe recognize some of the characters that I highlight here in terms of the work that they're doing and I guess the perspective that they're coming from. So this is me on Saturday out with a couple of very good friends of mine. The guy on the left is Rene Carriol, who is one of the country's leading business commentators, executive coaches. You name the company, he has coached their chief execs, their board members, just a phenomenal guy in terms of a presence in business. I've been fortunate to know him and call him a friend for the best part of 25 years. He's doing a huge amount of work at the moment, working with some of those big companies to take forward that Black Lives Matter agenda. You know, stellar corporate career, worked for IPC magazines, worked for Pizza Hut, worked for Marks and Spencer's. Guy on the right is Ray Walters. Rene and Ray met at Marks and Spencer's 15 years ago. Ray was one of their most senior menswear buyers in the 80s and the 90s. He then left Marks and Spencer's to work for a company, to run the company that was a major supplier for Marks and Spencer's, as well as other companies around the world. This company had 2 or 3 factories in 2 or 3 continents, just a huge just an amazingly humble guy. You could walk past him in the street and not know that he had that wealth of corporate experience. And the point I guess I'm making here is that there are people like Rene and Ray around. They're not unusual. They're not necessarily that many of them, but I know from my journey through careers that there are loads of people around who want to aspire to the kind of careers that Rene and Ray have had. And now, you know, I'm actually the youngest person in that picture because they both passed 60 2 or 3 years back. But you know, they're at a point now where they can draw on their wisdom and coach and support others who are working their way through the system. Now, I mentioned that because 2 Saturdays ago, Rene and I collaborated on this event. This is something called Career Masterclass. And there was a conference called Stretch 2020. And this was attended by a couple of hundred middle managers, mainly in financial services, mainly working in the city. I would say 80% of them were black and brown people. In fact, I would say the best represented group were Nigerian women. Now, why that's be the case might have something to do with this, because the person behind the company is this woman, Bukola Adisa. She herself has had a successful career working in the City of London, senior roles in places like JP Morgan, HSBC, Barclays, and Deloitte. And I guess the message that Rene and I were giving to the folks attending the conference is that the door is open. If your goal is to aim for the boardroom, to aim for the executive seat or the C-suite, that's a legitimate goal. Go for it. There has probably never been a better time to go for that, because companies have probably never been as receptive as they are now to seeking out the talent that we know exists in our community. So there is a group out there that are looking to make it in the corporate world. And it's important that they're recognized. Part of the barrier is that their talents, generally speaking, aren't recognized, which is why Bukola is doing the kind of work that she's doing. But that is one expression of Black life. Maybe that reflects the reality for some of you on this call this evening, but that is one expression of Black life that I see. This is another expression of Black life, and hopefully this video will work. There's no sound to it, so you're not going to hear anything. I'm just letting it run because this is what you see when you land on their website. This is a media channel called Got Kush TV. Now, those of you who know your history will recognize Kush as being part of the land of Nubia, which is basically in the area that we now call Egypt and Sudan. But it's essentially the roots of one of the earliest civilizations in Africa. Now, there's a personal touch for me because the guy that's on the screen right now is my nephew. He's my sister's oldest son, and he's one of the prime movers behind the channel. I'm also an investor or a micro investor because I pay a sum of money every month to keep the channel going. So this is more their philosophy, and you can read the words for yourself, but they're talking about that's what you see there is an advert for an event they've got coming up, and they are unapologetically Afrocentric. So for them, the idea of climbing the corporate ladder is not their thing. They respect those that want to do that, but their thing is much more about being who we are in terms of our original selves, working our way right back to before slavery, way before slavery, to the time when we were the original people on the planet, and taking our inspiration in terms of our spirit and our sense of self from that, because we had major civilizations before there was such a thing as slavery. So that is very much the philosophy that they are coming from on Got Kush TV. If you're familiar with their output, they've got a very active YouTube channel. They've been very active in the kind of aftermath of the Black Lives Matters process, the Black Pound days that have happened, I think, every month since July or August. They've been very active then. They've had all-day shows going on. So again, another point on the spectrum in terms of Black life. Very different to those that are aspiring to the corporate world, but equally legitimate for me. So, another point of view. Then, some of you may have been fortunate to come across this guy in your travels, Andrew Mohammed, otherwise known as the Investigator. Phenomenal guy. If you've ever seen him perform, and unfortunately, because of the time that we're in, you don't get the benefit of seeing him do a live performance. But he is a guy who gives the absolute definition to the phrase motivational speaker. Does a lot of his work with young people. I know he does a lot of work with the Westside Young Leaders Academy, more of which I'll talk about in a minute. But this is his website. And again, what he's been doing is being very active. So he holds regular online events, and he does a thing called a hidden truth, where he kind of deconstructs items of popular culture. So you can imagine with the passing of Chadwick Boseman recently, a lot of time talking about the Black Panther movie and talking about him as a figure and just the choices that he made and what he represents as a model, deconstructing Michael Jackson and Thriller and so on. Huge audiences he's getting, 200, 300, 400 people online every single week attending his events. So he has an audience. And for him, his message is really about self-determination. It kind of connects with the kind of the Afrocentrism in one way, but it's certainly not a conversation that is about slavery. It is much more about who are we going to be? It's much more about economics. It's much more about being the best you that can be. That is absolutely his message. And that's the message that he gets across to the young people that he's working with. So again, another expression, another perspectives on what it is to be Black, and another expression of Black life. Final example for me, and again, this one is very close to home because this is an organization that I've been involved with for the last 16 odd years, EASTSIDE Young Leaders Academy. Originally was working with Black boys in East London to help steer them away from the wrong kind of life by developing their leadership potential. That led to doing work in schools. That led to doing work in public schools, more of which in a minute. But, you know, 20 years on, for me, it plays a unique role. Now, here are the two people who are really the prime movers behind EASTSIDE Young Leaders Academy. Some of you may well know Ray Lewis, the guy on the left who was the founder, former prison governor. Another claim to fame, perhaps or notoriety, because he was part of Boris's office when Boris was mayor of London a decade or so ago. The woman on the right is Anne Collard, who has been a long-time associate of Ray. Trust me, both of them are as important to EASTSIDE. It could not work if either one of them were taken out of the system. And so they're a very powerful example of working together. And even though they are absolutely focused on working, well, originally it was with Black children, now the cohort is starting to widen. So it's much more in the territory of what we would call BAME these days. That's not language that I'm wild about, but you kind of get what I'm talking about. So I've gone the wrong way. I was there at the end of August because they've had a program called Scholars, which, to cut a long story short, essentially finds scholarships for young people to get to boarding school and to some of the country's top private schools. And what they organize at the point at which their preparation is finished, and the preparation runs over 15 months, is essentially a graduation ceremony. So this is the graduation. You've got young people who are going into year 7 in boarding school, young people going into year 9, and young people going into year 12. So there's 3 different key stages of secondary education. So there were about 25 young people all in all that were there. So there was a whole conversation to have about boarding schools and the role that they play, either in promoting social mobility or in perpetuating inequality. I acknowledge that conversation. You might be interested in having a conversation with some of the parents who are putting their young people, their sons and daughters, through that program. What's interesting is that when EASTSIDE got going in 2002, it was probably 80% of the young people were of Caribbean descent and about 20% of African descent, and actually coming from a variety of countries. Now it's the other way around. The overwhelming majority of the young people are from parents who are often directly from the continent, who are living here. And then the minority are from either the Caribbean community or from other communities as well. Now, this guy is Marcus Hall. He was one of the very first Eastside scholars, and he attended rugby school back in 2006. We know that.
What's the evolution of liquor tongue?
Not quite sure what's happening there. I'll continue.
She's muted again now. It's okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. Right. Okay. So Marcus is on the left of the, on the right. The picture on the left, the black and white, is of the first 4 Eastside scholars, and they are standing outside rugby school. The picture on the right was taken a couple of years ago. This is the front page of an article that was written in Sunday Times about their experience as Eastside scholars. So a really powerful experience. So Marcus was one of the original scholars. And what I'm showing you is that he's come back to give guidance to the next generation of scholars. Over the last 13 years, Eastside has probably enabled between 200 and 300 young people to obtain scholarships at boarding schools. And what we're now seeing is people going from the state school to boarding school, coming out of boarding school, going to university, and then coming out of university, and then coming back to Eastside to support of young people going through. So just a really powerful model. And when you think about the numbers of young people involved, I don't know of an organization that is doing that kind of work with that many people from that particular group over that period of time. So just amazing work and a huge privilege for me to be involved with. I was involved right at the beginning of the Scholar Scheme because I was a trustee of Eastside at that time. Marcus himself is also now on the board of Eastside. So again, just a really powerful demonstration of completing that circle. So again, another demonstration of Black life. And we can talk about the rights and the wrongs of that. So one message you could take from all of that is that we are here to stay, at least for some. Others might ask that as a question. Are we here to stay? We may be here now, but are we necessarily limited to just being here? For some, the world is their oyster. For some, Africa is their destination, because ultimately that's where we came from. And again, no rights and wrongs there, but though that spectrum of opinion is present in Black lives in Britain today. And I think it's really important that not only does, if you like, the host community acknowledge that, but we ourselves also acknowledge that as well. And that's fine. So getting towards the end now. So now I want to get a little bit more specific. And it feels like an oversimplification, but I'll make it just for the point of making the point. If I were going to talk about, what is it that white people, whoever they are, and I'm using the kind of the graphic for that movie just to kind of make that point, what are the messages that they might take from what we are seeing so far in terms of how to go forward? And I guess just a few quick points for me, because there's a learning agenda. I think it's interesting that you have that line, grow by any means necessary, because I think what we are hearing from white people in general is that they have things to learn. So how do you go about that learning process? Well, first of all, it starts at an individual level. And then ideally it becomes much more of a collective process. Those are words taken from an article on the British Association of website written by an academic at UEL. But that just captures what it is for me. The process of change and learning starts with us as individuals. And then as you progress along that journey, you then turn it into a collective process. So what does it take to engage in that learning process? Well, for one, it takes some humility. Accept that there are things you probably aren't going to know, and be okay with that. You don't have to have the answer to everything. It's okay not to know, and be okay with not knowing. That means putting much more of an emphasis on listening rather than talking some of the time. I think it means engaging with this construct of whiteness. So whiteness is not so much about people for me. Whiteness is about a way of thinking and a way of being, which you can buy into, but you don't have to buy into. And I think that idea of racial stress, because certainly what I've experienced as somebody who's worked with organizations over 30 odd years working on these kind of issues, is that talking about race induces a particularly unique kind of stress in people that I don't see with talking about any other difficult or controversial topic. Part of the learning process is to get past that stress. Yes, it's related to not knowing. Yes, it might be related to wanting to be seen to do and say the right thing, but that's okay. Coming to terms with that discomfort is an essential part of the process. The only way out of that is through that. That will be my perspective at any rate. What that also means is taking a look around at the people who are in your circle. And you may well find that there are people around you who are close to you, maybe your family, maybe your close friends, people you've known for a long time, who you are now starting to see in a different light. Really, the conversation now is about challenging them. And that takes courage. I absolutely get that it takes courage, but it's important that you find that courage. And it's about how you assess the risks that you have to manage. It may be, on those occasions, challenging your peers who are maybe saying and doing things that are maybe causing you a conflict in terms of the value and the aspiration that you want to be valuing Black lives. And in the corporate world, in organizations, there's a lot of talk about being an ally. And I found this phrase. John Amici, who some of you may know, very active on LinkedIn, was an ex-NBA basketball player, now does some great work with organizations and corporates, particularly around this kind of agenda. He talks about being called an ally is not a title that you can just take, it's bestowed. So to put it crudely, we choose whether or not you're an ally. You don't necessarily choose that for yourself. And one person may see you as an ally, another person may not. That's okay. You can't be, and you don't aspire necessarily to be an ally to everybody. And secondly, the role of an ally is to amplify the voices of the group that you're an ally to. So being an ally is not about making yourself look good because you can bring all these Black folks in. You know, being an ally is about not only bringing those people in, but ensuring that those folks are heard and get their seat at the table, and that they get their share of whatever it is that they're due. So that allyship thing really is important, but let's be clear about what it means and what it doesn't mean. Almost there. So we know that Black lives matter. We know that Black children matter. The thing that I'm interested in is, what about Black futures? Because they also matter as well. So just some quick thoughts from me about what we might need to be thinking about there. I think for us all, there's a thing about finding your lane. I gave you those 3 or 4 different perspectives on Black life that are present in Britain at the moment. That's about people finding their lane. Now, you may belong, you may identify, you may choose to be in more than one lane. That's fine. The important thing is that you find it, and your lane is your route, your goal towards productivity, satisfaction, success, however you define it. Those are individual choices for us all, and the doors are opening. What there is an opportunity for us to really capitalize on those doors opening. At the same time, one of the things I heard about a lot during the summer, and I still hear about today, and in a sense with some of the sessions that we've had during this month to cover this, is about healing. You know, the George Floyd incident awakened a lot of trauma. You know, when I talk to my friends in the corporate sector, they are encountering executives, senior Black executives, for whom that whole process has reawakened a lot of trauma. So a necessary part of realizing who we can be is to attend to the healing where we need to attend to it as well. If that means counseling, if that means therapy, then do that. I can speak from personal experience of doing that as well. And I would not be where I am now without going through that kind of process. It's one thing to recognize that we have the trauma, but we need to go a step further and really take steps to heal that trauma where you need to. I think we need optimism. Anybody here who's a parent, you know, and it's tough raising Black children in this culture, but at the same time, giving them a sense of optimism, a sense of possibility is fundamental in that process. And we need to retain that sense of optimism for ourselves as well. It's like that Gary Young quote that I'll come back to in a minute. You know, things look bleak. We can be pessimistic, but we should resist the tendency to do that. Instead, what we need is resilience. Racism. But through our being here, we are testament to our ability to come through it. My take on it is that we, if I can talk about a kind of a collective we have changed this country for the better through our being here. And we've done that because of our resilience. And I think it's important that we don't underestimate our capacity for resilience. Instead, what we do is that we find ways of building that resilience. I've done sessions on that before. I'd be happy to kind of talk with anybody about some of the things that are necessary in terms of building that sense of resilience. So I'm back to where I started. Things look bleak. The propensity to despair is strong, but should not be indulged. Sing yourself up. Imagine a world in which you might thrive, for which there is no evidence, and then fight for it. For me, again, now that you've seen why I've started with that phrase, that really does encapsulate what comes after Black Lives Matter. We have to imagine a world in which you might thrive. In a way, that's hard. You know, we've lived in a world which has been shaped by discrimination, by racism, by oppression. So it's hard to imagine yourself as not existing in a world like that. But unless we start to imagine ourselves like that, it won't happen. And that's a choice that we can all make in the privacy of our own minds, and then find ways of acting from that perspective and finding those that share that perspective with us such that we can build common cause. So that's it for me. That's been a lot of talking. I think I've managed to keep to something like half an hour, maybe a little bit more than that. But that's as much as I wanted to say in terms of a presentation. Hopefully that's made some sense. I'm happy to hear where it doesn't make sense. And I'm also happy to hear where maybe you've got some difference of opinion here. But thanks for listening so far. I'm going to unshare my screen and let's see where we go.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, I can see a comment from Marcia. Marcia, how you doing? Good that you're here. Can I share these networks in the chat? Just be clear about which networks you're talking about.
Was it
the one about the scholarship, for example?
Okay.
And the different channels that we're talking about, where we go from here in a sense, or supporting the Black upliftment.
Okay. Yes. Well, there's a lot going on. I mean, what I can do, what I showed on screen were essentially screenshots from websites. So if you'll give me some time, I'm happy to get the links and post those links in the chat. The Scholars Program is, I mean, that's very specific to EASTSIDE, and it's essentially, a lot depends on the age of your young people. Not everybody that applies for the Scholars Program gets onto it. So it's not an automatic thing, because there's a 15-month preparation process that young people go through. And it's an essential part of the process, because what we're doing is moving people from an environment that they're familiar with to an environment that they have never encountered in their lives. And more importantly, their parents won't have encountered it either. So a lot of work goes into preparing not only the young people, but their parents for the transition that they are going to go through. So I'm happy to post some details of EASTSIDE, and you can make contact with them by all means. I think, again, because of the situation that we're working in at the moment, programs aren't working in quite the same way as they used to. The practice was to get the young people in on evening times during the week, and then on Saturdays. Those gatherings aren't necessarily happening as frequently now. But again, I'll get the details for EASTSIDE and post that in the chat. Okay. I can see a comment here from somebody who actually works for Sainsbury's and the stance they've taken on Black History Month. Would you mind, it'll be great actually to hear a little bit more about what you said. You said you made a video at work about what Black history means to me, which will be featured on their website. Do you want to come on mic and maybe on camera and just say a bit more about that? That's a fantastic comment.
Hi, Fitzroy. I don't want to come on camera, but I will.
Okay, no, that's fine. We can hear you. That's good. That's good.
Yeah, Sainsbury's, they've been really, like what you said earlier, outspoken about how they feel about Black history, about the Black Lives Matter movement. And even in store, you can see it. The vibe is really lovely.
Okay.
And mind you, I work in the Sainsbury's in St. Albans. So
Okay.
I drive there like 35 minutes drive every single day, and that area
Okay.
is predominantly white.
Okay.
So to see the way
Yeah,
that they, you know, to see the way that they've taken it so serious in store, they've got, you know, the same poster you had in your presentation. They have it all up, and then when they asked me this, what I spoke about was that how Black history for me isn't necessarily just about the slavery, not about
absolutely.
apartheid in South Africa. It's not about segregation in America. It's about the positivity that Black people have brought to society. It's about the way that we have contributed to society positively, not necessarily the negative stuff that we've been through. And I feel like obviously we can never forget what we've been through, but we need to start to be celebrated in light of what we have contributed to society more. And so that's what I spoke about in my video. And then
Okay.
asked me to talk about my hero. Oh, go on.
Okay. As somebody that works for a what impact does that have on you, that you're seeing your employer? I mean, Sainsbury's, like, you know, it's a household name. Everybody knows Sainsbury's if you live here. How does that leave you feeling as an employee?
I mean, it makes me feel accepted. It makes me feel valued. It makes me feel like they see me as an individual, that, you know, they see my struggle as a Black woman and they celebrate it. And I mean, I don't necessarily agree about Black History Month being just a month. We should be celebrated every single day of the year.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But, you know, the fact that they take the time out to celebrate us for that month anyway, I feel like it's a move in the right direction.
Yeah. Okay.
So I do feel valued by them.
Right. Okay. Well, that's brilliant. No, thank you so much. I had no idea that you work for Sainsbury's, that you're going to be here. So it's just it's great to get that kind of affirmation, because you know, it's easy to be cynical about companies and what they do in relation to this kind of an agenda. And again, for me, you know, I've been around a long time. I've seen a lot of companies do a lot of stuff. It's not the first time that we've been having national conversations about this kind of stuff. I am genuinely seeing things from companies that I have not seen before. You know, a national retailer saying, you know what, if you don't like us, go somewhere else.
Exactly.
That is not what they do. That is not what they do. So to see that, and to see it in that way, and to be articulated in exactly the way that it needs to be articulated, with that polite but unapologetic, this is what we stand for. Take it or leave it.
Yeah.
No, that's powerful.
It means a lot.
So much.
Thank you.
Okay, I can see a comment here from Paul. I think you mentioned it in your talk. When the conversation begins about change, those people who are Caucasian feel threatened and clam up without realizing they're part of the solution. I think that there needs to be a media campaign of short 5-minute stories where Black people are doing things, doctors, nurses, mentors, bankers, etc., to show that we do contribute to the UK. Yes, Camille, you have your hand up.
I do, and
Okay, unscheduled interruption there.
I do apologise about that. Sorry. Worst possible time has been silent. Anyway, just to add to what Paul just said just then about a possible campaign. I don't know if you've heard of the 56 Black Men campaign.
Yep.
So if you haven't seen already, it is absolutely fan. I'm going to try and share my screen with you in just a second.
Yep.
The 56 Black Men campaign kind of feeds into what you were saying just a moment ago, whereby people or Black men were featured, and it had an image of them. Oh, are you sharing it? There we go. Right. So it has.
I'm sharing EASTSIDE Young Leaders Academy.
Oh, okay.
We're asking about something. So carry on. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So there we go. I can now share my screen with you. Give me 1 second. Sorry, it's just taking a second. There we go. Can you see the gentleman that I'm referring to on my screen?
Is it Cephas Williams?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So they did this absolutely brilliant campaign where it was all over London, bus stations, billboards, you name it, and they had all the same images of brothers in hoodies, same kind of background, and underneath it, it would say their name and what they did. So they had on there, for instance, brothers that were doctors, brothers that were scientists, brothers that were media leaders, brothers that were doing so many absolutely incredible things. So this over here just kind of shows a small example. Obviously, you can't see it particularly well, so my tip would be to maybe Google it as well. But yeah, look at maybe the 56 Black Men campaign, and that's one example of some of the things that that is highlighted as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think and it's been really interesting to see the kind of response that Cephas has had from the corporate sector again. You know, some big companies getting behind him and collaborating with. So, you know, you can't just stick a billboard up anywhere in London because you feel like that stuff is tightly controlled. So you need to get access to the gatekeepers in order to be able to get the visibility for the campaign. So the fact that he's been able to do that in the way that he has, because you can go all over the country and see those posters, you know, that in itself is a significant achievement.
Brilliant.
Okay, got a question here from Sade. I'll probably murder the pronunciation. Question is, what do you think people who work in predominantly non-Black companies can do to encourage involvement education in movements like BLM or even just BHM? Okay. Did you have a particular company? Because I think what we're seeing this year is a lot of companies getting involved. So what might be the kind of company that you might have in mind who might need the encouragement? I don't know whether you want to come on mic or on camera or both.
Sorry, it took me a minute to figure out how to turn on my mic.
Fine. Welcome to the conversation.
So first of all, you pronounced my name right.
I did, thank you. That's good.
My thing is that I've worked with a lot of smaller companies, and I think that a lot of bigger companies now are getting involved in the conversation, whereas the smaller companies who don't have, I don't want to say they don't have an interest, but their workforce isn't really that interested or engaged with the subject. So my question is really, how do the smaller companies, what do you think people should do to encourage it when they don't have a workforce who's directly impacted?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And the short answer is it's very tough because, you know, as somebody who's run a small business or run a business within a business. So the guy owned a company and there were 2 or 3 different business units, and I ran one of those business units. It was, I suppose, easy for us because it was a Black-owned company. And part of our business was working with organizations on some of the issues that we've been talking about today. But if I'm running a company that makes plastic bags that you get when you go to your corner shop, or even the plastic bags that you can get when you go to the supermarket. Yes, I might have my clients and my customers, but my principal business is keeping my business going. And unless I can see how getting involved in something like this, A, is going to help me to make more money, and B, is going to help me to attract more customers, I'm not going to do it because I literally don't have the time to do it. The time that I spend away from ensuring that I'm doing my day-to-day business is money that I'm throwing down the drain. So I guess my other point would be, I don't necessarily expect every single company to do something. What I do expect is that they don't stand in the way. Because apart from anything else, we're talking about the law of the land. Every company, regardless of its size, has to abide by the law of the land. And that means that they don't discriminate in their employment practices, in their customer relationships, in their advertising and merchandising and all of the rest of it. And maybe the argument from that perspective, fundamentally, is about reputation. No company wants to be known as racist. Now, that's a negative argument, and it's not as persuasive as a positive argument which says, do this and you will benefit. If your argument is do this or you'll get punished, you're always going to get a certain amount of resistance. But sometimes that's all you have. But as I say, I don't think every company can or maybe needs to. It would be great if they did. And I think that it's part of the gradual process that I'm talking about. I don't think it's going to be today nobody's interested, tomorrow everybody's interested. It's going to take time. The more that big companies get on board and can demonstrate that this is good for business, the more small companies will want to do that, because oftentimes small companies are interested in big companies as their customers and clients. Yeah, does that help to answer the question?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, I've posted some links to websites in the chat, which I think will be around afterwards. So if you want to follow up on any one of those, then by all means, be my guest. Some of them will be access to development opportunities. Some of it is just alternative and like Gotkush. Gotkush is a TV channel. So if you want some alternative viewing habits to develop, that might be a good place to start, depending on your perspective. Again, depends on whether or not Afrocentrism is your thing. If it is, then absolutely be there. If it's not, well, be open and have a look at what it is that I have to say. That will be my message. Okay, let me just scroll up a bit through the chat. Oh, okay, there's probably, yeah, Javine was having, Javine, can you hear me now? Are you still on the call?
Yes, I can hear you, and I've had my hands up as well.
Oh, you did? Okay, right. Well, go ahead, go for it. Absolutely. There's another hand up as well, actually. Yeah, so I'm noticing that. So yeah, Javine, whilst you have the mic, so yeah, go for it.
Okay, thank you. It's not a question. Basically, what I want to say is that I welcome this talk that we're having in terms of what after Black Lives Matter, because as we all know, and with history and is that something like this start out and or similar that has happened in the past, and somewhere along the line it loses the energy and it gets corrupted, it gets turned on its head and turned back to us, and then it becomes counterproductive. We start they start having this internal war or whatever that, so that whole confusion and things that tends to manifest itself, because obviously the powers to be don't want it to go further. However, I do believe that this do have it's worldwide, so it's not just focus in America or here, it is absolutely worldwide. And therefore, because of that, I do believe that we do need to think about, after the, like, I guess you'd probably say, and forgive the phrase, but after the storm, then what next? Does it just go calm, or does it or even if it goes calm, does it calm but still pushing and carrying to ensure that what we start out with, we are going to get there, to get to that goal? So I do believe this is a very apt time and poignant and very, very, very constructive talk. And thank you for, I missed some of it, so I'll have to go back and listen to the recording.
Yeah, I think we've got a recording, so that'll be good. Yeah.
But yes, thank you.
No, Javine, no, I think I distinguish between the organization called Black Lives Matter, which has its own agenda. And I think that's an interesting agenda. I think some of it is a tough sell. But I think that the idea, the movement, the cause of Black Lives Matter doesn't require that organization. That's about us and what we choose to do in our own lives and who we choose to influence, and all of that. Okay, a couple of hands up, so I'm going to go to those. I think Angie Corbin, I think you've had your hands up. Sorry for taking a while to get to you.
Hi, thank you. I won't be too long, but again, just like Javine said, thank you very much for this. It's been really great. I don't know if this will help Sade. or not. But I for most, I'm in my 60s now. And
Okay.
For most of my career,
You don't look it.
Thank you. I'm a legal accounts manager, finance manager, administrative manager for law firms. And for most of my working life, and I mean right up until I was probably in my 40s, I was the only black person. And for most of the time in my department, I was the only woman. So I
Okay.
had the racism and I
Okay.
had sexism climbing up. And all I can say to younger people is try not to be afraid of who you are. I don't think, I think some of us, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way at all, but we put our blackness before us and we forget that we're men, we're women, we're talented, we've got, a profession. So I think if we try to make ourselves a bit more whole and less fearless, I mean, what I did, for example, just to give you a quick example, I worked for a law firm, was in charge of, put in charge of this department, first black woman there. Nobody wanted to listen to me because their best friend was one that was in charge before and they sacked her.
Right.
Not only did I have to break that barrier, but I had to sort of like, so I just used to start.
Yeah,
I used to
I've
take my
been
mum
there. Yeah.
every Christmas, bring in my mum's Christmas cakes, and then I'd talk about the tradition in the Caribbean, and just slowly but surely, I was just thinking, I'm here to stay, so I'm just gonna keep talking about myself, my people, you know. And one woman said to me, "Oh, you're just like us." I said, "Oh, what do you mean by that? What does that mean?" You know, so Sade, you're going to get that. But with small companies, maybe in this day and age especially, you can ask about their diversity and inclusion program. You can say to them, "Oh, have we got a diversity and inclusion policy? And if so, what is it? And if so, where are the posters that are around the office?" You can make them, if you like, get involved that way. Do you see what I mean? By asking them about this, because then a lot of them don't have it or don't want to display it. They've got a policy and it's in a drawer, and they don't want anyone to see this policy because it's not their thing. Well, you make it their thing.
Yeah.
You're a black woman or black man working in that firm. You need to feel protected. What are your policies for diversity and inclusion? And can I see them, please? And the minute you ask them that question, you switch on a switch, like the switch that I think that's happening now in 2020 with Black Lives Matter. Even with the pandemic, there's a lot of change and learning going on.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure we're alert to this. And this gives us our chance to be fearless. We must not be afraid, first of all, of ourselves or of going forward with other people. That's what sometimes people see. They see our fear first, then our colour, then who we are behind that. And I think we just need to mix it all up a bit and just say, here I am, this is the whole package. You know, not always easy, but try to do that.
Angie, that's some phenomenal wisdom that you've given us there. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, no, I really do agree. And as you say, it's not easy, but I think there is, you know, we're human, you know, and that's what we lead with. Jasbir, you've had your hand up. I don't know whether you still want to ask the question or.
Yeah, no, I'm still here.
Okay.
I totally agree with the two people who spoke. Javine, I know very well. I just wanted to recap. There's some of us who've been actively involved in activism or community engagement, community development way back in late 70s, early 80s, like myself.
Okay, you don't look old enough.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that a lot of these things you're talking about, we've been there, we've done it.
Yeah.
You know, we've experienced it. We've been there. You know, campaign work, setting up groups, setting up organizations.
Yeah.
You know, fighting for funding. We've been there. And so, but and I agree with what you're saying. It's important to be humble. Because what I've found is a lot of people, they make a start, but they also want to make a name for themselves. So you know who you've got to be very clear about your life journey pathway. Are you doing it for the collective? Are you doing it for yourself? I've even had people asking for letters, you know, in order because they want to striving to get an OBE or an MBE, you know. You know, so I've gone through all of that. So I wonder, and I do question myself in terms of it, you know, if you're working for the community, are you doing, for what reasons are you doing this? What's the ultimate aim of yourself? What is the vision for yourself with the community? So we've all gone through this journey ourselves. I just wanted to relate to you is that it's not just happened now. Some of this has been happening for a long time. And there's a lot of us hanging around here have been there. They've done it, in terms of, and, even I think I was involved with one of the first Black housing associations be set up in the country way back in early 1980s.
Okay, which one was that?
Ebony Sister Housing Association.
Okay, yeah, that rings well. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a group of us who actually set that up.
Okay.
It took us 3 years. It was not easy.
All right.
So, so I just wanted to share with you to say that.
We're hearing from a history maker.
Well, it's not history maker. There's still some of us are still in contact with.
It's history. Trust me on that.
It's history. I was brought up in Southall and I've witnessed the riots. I realized everything, setting up, Southall monitoring groups, are the Black Sisters, are the Rights.
Okay.
We've all worked with all of them, so there's some of us here to actually still tell a story.
Yeah. No, it's so true. And for me, I think I might have said this, but I think what you said, thank you for what you said. And for me, that's a cause for optimism. Some of us have been here before and we've succeeded, we've failed, we've learned. Exactly. And we can draw from that in how we approach the future. And it's a different time.
It's a different time, but I must say, Ebony Sister Housing Association is still surviving, is still existing. I'm the chairperson of the of the housing association.
There aren't that many black-led housing associations still around.
Exactly, so a lot of them actually been taken over by the whiter or the white.
A lot of them were taken out.
Yeah, that's right. Lots of Black Housing Association was set up in the in 1980s. A lot of them actually because the funding was actually stopped by the housing corporation.
That's
so
right.
Actually trying to survive.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
We're one of the few are still floating around.
Yeah. Okay, Jasmine, thank you. Right. It is now 7:38, so we've had pretty much our allotted time. I just want to check to see whether or not there are any final questions or anything burning that anybody who's still on the call wants to say right now.
Besides saying a big thank you, Fitzroy, again for your continued support and for facilitating such a brilliant webinar. That was the main thing I wanted to say. And further to that, please, if you haven't already done so, please, guys, complete the little survey that I've given to you, just so that way, we can continue to be able to facilitate activities like this and check out some of the other events as well. But no further comments from me. Thank you again.
It's like calling a call center. Once you finish your call, take the survey. That's how it works these days.
Thank you.
Okay, well, unless there's anything else, I'm not seeing any more hands up other than those. I think I will. I'll lower your hand, Jasmine, unless there's something else you wanted to say. I'm going to say thank you again for making some time available during this evening. Hopefully there are things that I've said that will resonate with you, that you can carry with you and that you can act on in your lives in some way or another. But I really do think that, we have an opportunity right now. And it's for us, I think, to take it for what it's worth and to push it as far as we can, both for yourself in terms of your own life and for us as a collective, insofar as there is a collective. So thanks once again. Thanks for your company and your attention. And until next time, stay safe and we'll see you again soon.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Fitzroy.
No worries.